All right, good afternoon. Kevin Lawrence here from Vancouver, BC, Canada, and here with Chris Mursau, the president of Topgrading from just outside of Chicago. And we're going to talk about the book that he and Brad Smart just recently released called Foolproof Hiring and some simple strategies to notably improve hiring success. So we're going to dig into that today, and we'll have a chance to take any questions in the chat as we kind of progress throughout today. And a couple things I just wanted to share overall to start with. You know, in our firm, one of the things that we've seen is that the leaders can't scale, the company won't grow. And that's why I was first introduced to Topgrading about more than 10, probably 15 years ago, before I started working on the Scaling Up book. And I kept hearing CEOs say this is a game-changing methodology. So I, got someone to help me learn it and master it. And now most of our clients use it in different forms. And it's a serious discipline. It gets better results. It's a serious discipline. And it really just helps to make sure we have leaders that can scale. And when they stop scaling, we have to, develop them or make changes. So it's a big part of what we do. And in our company, looking for the simple solutions in all this complexity of growth. That's what we focus on. This is simple, and it takes discipline and rigor. And really for our firm, there's CEO coaching and development that we work on for the leaders we work with. But when we drive growth strategy, ACEs and key seats is a real big part of what we focus on. And then developing and augmenting those key seats, those key leadership roles. And this methodology that Chris is a master of is a key piece of that. We've got our awesome internal team I just want to give a shout out to, who's always out there helping our clients. And then we also have our people team who are here with us today, and a bunch of the Kristen on our team here. I'm just going to see if I can get Kristen. She disappeared off my screen. She was here 1 second ago. There she is. Kristen can just say hi for a second. Kristen, one of our people team, along with Brett and Curtis, are helping us with HR strategies and structures and things like that. Kristen, oh, there she is. Kristen's so Kristen does lots of top grading interviews and assessments aside from other things, and has collaborated with Chris on a bunch of projects. We have a serious commitment to this methodology and for helping our clients to continually build better teams, because with better teams, everything is easier. Okay, 1 second here. There we go. All right. And by the way, we have a program called Scaling Leaders, which we're putting out that has some of the frameworks of scaling up and good to great that we use for developing leaders to help them to be more effective. That's coming up later this year. Also on our site, you'll see some great case studies. One of our clients, Amish, not that far from where Chris is, down in the US there. And a case study where he ended up replacing his entire executive team when we started working together, and how he did that and the difference it's made. Those are hard moves to make, but that's what this is about. So there's a video of me interviewing Amish, and you can read the case on our site. Also, Salim Ismail from his book, Exponential Organizations, talking about leveraging technology in the future. And those are other resources available to you. But over to Chris. And what I love about working with Chris is he's passionate about finding ways to get better people on our teams and finding the times when we need to say no and not put someone into a role internally promote. And one of the clients that we worked on together is they were replacing the president and a number of the key executives, or actually the CEO. And they started working on it many years out. And Chris and Kristen went in and worked and did 360 reviews and top grading interviews to assess candidates about their capability to be promoted. And we don't want to promote people to the points of failure. So all these things are great tools, and they're very, very powerful. And the hard part sometimes is that it takes a little bit of extra discipline and rigor up front, and not necessarily the most fun that some people want to do. So Chris is going to talk to us today about solutions to these 4 problems. And Chris, I'll turn it over to you, and I really want to appreciate you being here with us today and sharing your wisdom after doing thousands and thousands of interviews and hiring of A players.
Well, Kevin, appreciate the introduction, and I think maybe a place to start might maybe what is foolproof hiring? If anyone knows about top grading, this is the 6th or 7th book, maybe the 7th book on top grading. Not all of them titled top grading. 3 of them were the 3 most recent books, kind of pre foolproof hiring were. And so why write another one? And
Great
I
question.
have a couple of props with me.
Yeah.
This is
Yes.
one.
Yep.
This is the second edition of Top Grading. I took the jacket off. It looks nicer on my shelf with this. And so 560 pages. And
Yep.
so 6, 7 years later, we said, we need a new edition. Let's make it shorter. And so it's a little shorter, still 350 pages. A lot more like, I don't know, a textbook. And really that, like, especially that second edition of Top Grading, we were working with some massive companies at the time. And, they would train all of their managers, and it was essentially their textbook. It was the supplement
Yep.
to that training. So every nitty-gritty detail. But so often the medium is in the message, or the message is in the medium. And you pick up a 560-page book about how to hire right, and you're like, well, this is too much for me.
Yes.
And case studies, you see like GE in the 90s, and
it was reinforced from 14 different angles with lots of good stuff.
Yeah.
But it was like too much of too much good. Yes.
And there are certainly leaders who picked it up, gravitated toward it, and said, let's do it. Let's do the full blown. The thing is, it also takes really a coached implementation to get it perfect and you get it exactly right. In fact of the matter is, there are some things in there that if you just do them, you will hire better. You may not become a case study, and to be one of our case studies, you have to have over 75% A players hired. And the average of our case studies, they went from 26% A players hired pre-top grading to 85% A players hired post-top grading. And that's, it's a way to have a really successful growing, business that does great things for customers and clients and creates jobs and such. And especially for our smaller clients and those who are getting ready to scale, they don't often have the resources. One, to pay our team to coach their implementation to help them get it implemented, or two, just having the internal resources where you can hand them the book and say, hey, please do this. And that's why we wrote Foolproof Hiring. There's something between getting 1 in 4 right and getting 9 out of 10 right in terms of the hires. And the whole 80-20 rule. You don't necessarily you're not going to get 80% of the results, but you can get a whole bunch of the results by putting in, 30 or 40% of the effort. So not quite 80-20, but in the general vicinity of that.
Talked about it normally if you do a full implementation of top grading, which is a lot of work and multiple years of building that rigor into an organization. And even for clients of ours that have to sustain, it's hard. Because basically the bar generally keeps fading unless they hold it up. But when you and I talked before this, you said basically with full top grading and the rigor around it, you should be most organizations should triple their hiring success. That's available because most are about in that 25-30% A players, and they should get 75 to 90 if they're exceptional, but at least 75. So roughly triple. And what you're saying, what I liked about this with this book is it gets them probably 50, double. At least to go for twice as good at hiring A players without using all of the disciplines. And I think that's helpful because top grading really kind of, although it's excellent, it overwhelms people. And that's why we used to always tell people often to read the book Who that Brad's son wrote, because top grading would almost make it seem too much of a mountain to climb for a lot of people. Where with this book, you've made it notably simpler to just get those high value points.
Yeah. And I just thought of this analogy and I use this one. I don't know if I've used this one, but I think it works.
You can use it
like,
now. Yeah.
New Year's resolution. I am going to get into shape. When you're not in shape, when in all the various ways, you are not in shape at all. You haven't seen the inside of a gym in 20 years, whatever it may be. You eat cheeseburgers and go to McDonald's more often than you have vegetables. And so, the full-blown top grading is like saying, all right, I'm getting the gym membership, personal trainer. I'm going to eat perfectly. I'm going to drink a gallon of water every day. And you know what? You will get in shape if you do all of those things. But going from 0 to all of it, not many people can sustain it. I think that's actually a really, really good analogy. Foolproof hiring is at least get your backside into the gym 3 days a week and do something. And maybe, cut out the McDonald's and eat a few more vegetables. That's, it's the equivalent of that.
I like it.
You'll get in better shape. You're not going to be on the cover of Men's Health or Self Magazine anytime soon, but you'll be in a lot better shape. You'll feel better. You'll look better. Your clothes will fit better and stuff. And so that's foolproof hiring. It is hire better, avoid some of those mishires, those hiring mistakes, because every time you do, you essentially put more money in the bank. You avoid the cost and get the productivity and value that that A players bring. Your culture is going to be a little bit better, because as we talk about hiring A players, it's high performers, but high performers who exhibit your core values and really fit your culture well. So you're going to improve your culture a little bit, or make it easier to maintain your culture every time you avoid one of those mishires. So it's also sort of a bit of a gateway to full-blown top grading. And so it's a starting point. You can see that some of these things work, and you'll hire better. You'll have some more A players. You'll have some more resources to help you, do the more advanced things. And, you can take it sort of, you think of this as phase one to get hiring in better shape.
Love it. So which part of the principles in foolproof hiring do you want to start with? That's a difference maker.
Hey, Kevin, I'm going to share. So the slide you had popped up there, I think that's worth popping up once more. And I can do it. I'll do it. I'll
got
take
it.
the share
Great.
because I'll use I'll bring a couple more slides up. So there
Great.
it is. Or here it will be in just a moment. 5 big. There we go. 5 big problems.
Yeah.
And these are really these are ordered sort of in the order of a hiring process. So number one, you don't have enough A players to pick from. And so no matter how good you are at interviewing and screening applicants and doing reference calls, it doesn't matter if you don't have any A players in the top of the funnel. Sure. So you need to think about your recruiting. We're going to talk about that in a second. And then, resumes are candidates' sales brochure. And that's how we let people into the hiring process for the most part. And we are letting them in based on their highlight reel, not the full story by any stretch, and maybe not even true. And that you can, if you can read it on your screen, more than 70% of resumes and CVs contain lies.
Do you mean like blatant lies, or do you mean like they were there for 3 years and they said they were there for 3 years and 2 months?
So there's a bunch of research, and I've got a slide for that too. Give me.
Sure. You can get to it later. It's fine. Yeah.
I'll get to it later. There's been a whole bunch of research on it. And the research is somewhere between 20% and 80% of resumes are either incomplete or inaccurate. And so I would suggest that the 20% is closer to those who blatantly lie. And the 70% is, and we put it up there for a little bit of a shock value. But we can think 70% of resumes are either inaccurate, incomplete, or both.
I got it.
And so, we're screening people in. We're reading it as though that's gospel, and it's not. Just like all of your websites, you do not have a page or pages in there detailing how you lost 3/4 of your clients in the first year. You say it's just not in there. It's not. So we're not getting
not our nature. Got it.
So then we get people in and we start interacting with them, and we talk to them for a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe have a lunch with them where you're talking a lot more about, a football team or a hockey team than you are about the actual job. And so in those shorter interactions, we have to choose. Either you can go deep into 2 or 3 areas, or you can go shallow into a broad number of areas. Either way, they're not revealing. Like, we don't get the full story. And then we don't verify. We take everything that the candidates say. We're like, all right, it sounds good. Let's hire the person, without verifying by talking with some people who have seen them in action in those jobs that we learned about.
You know what, Chris, we had one on that where we got burned really badly. We did an assessment, and there was flags, and it said check references, and the client didn't do it, and they said they were going to. They didn't do it, and we're actually sitting in a meeting 6 months later going, and we go back and pull up the report from the assessment, and the flags that were there were absolutely what we were seeing, and it was bad. Like, the flags were good indicators of their bad behavior, and the CEO was like, "This is crazy. right? This is incredible. So-and-so said they were great and all this stuff. And I said to him, well, did you ever check the references? And he's like, no. So he steps out of the room, he gets on the call, and he calls the CEO of the organization they reported to. After 5 minutes, he comes back and he goes, if we had checked that reference, there's no way that person would have been allowed in the building.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so they didn't complete that last, and it was a phone call. It was just a simple phone call. And unfortunately, it was after the person had been there 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everyone's guilty of it. I mean, really. I mean,
it's hard. It's hard stuff. Yes. Okay. Let's go back to the last one, Chris. I jumped on that. Let's go back to the last one there.
Yeah. And so the last one, and I took the screen off, and that's all right. The last one is just applicant screening tools don't work very well. Whether they're in your ATS or whether they come from Indeed, or, if it's some kind of a test, personality test, behavioral personality, like they don't work very well. And what happens is believe it or not, they screen A players out and they let C players through. And we don't know which is which. And so, if you are going to use a screening tool, be certain it works, and test it. And don't just take the test providers or the screening tool providers' word for it. You need to be thoughtful.
It's a point of data-ish. Yeah.
Awesome. And that's Kevin, that's another kind of a connected, because so often personality test of some kind is used as a screening tool. Those are not screening tools. They are data points, because those tools, some are very manipulatable, others are less manipulatable, but even those that are less manipulatable are often directionally correct. And there are times where there are things that are wrong in there. And so
we use DISC all the time. DISC is directionally correct, but it doesn't mean, it means your way of working, your person may or may not be consistent with what the role requires. Let's say the role is super technical or detailed or other things, but it doesn't mean you're going to be good. And it also doesn't mean that you'll be bad, but it's another perspective to consider, but not something you can make a decision on.
Well, and Kevin there, and I don't know if Kristen remembers specifically who I'm talking about, but the client we talked about that is replacing their leadership team and they need a new CEO, and they started 5 years beforehand. And so that's a great lesson too.
Yeah, that's smart.
The earlier you can start on the people stuff, the better off you will be. And, not having to be reactionary, you can do those things more proactively. There was a candidate though, we took the DISC assessment. And for any of you who know the DISC assessment, this person got a relatively low D. It was a relatively low D. The thing is, over his 25-year career, there were just consistent and multiple examples of his getting stuff done. And so I often think it's very broad in general, but D is how hard you drive and kind of how you get things
done. pushing for results. And
and here it was a data point, and we said, all right, that's what the DISC says. However, we have 10 examples of him getting things done and delivering some pretty significant results over time, and he's been in the role for a year and a half now, and it all turned out well. So it just, you don't know unless you spend 4 hours with him, which we did. We spent 4 hours because it's an executive role. We spent 4 hours with him, and we were able to say there's counter evidence to that. So, there's no magic bullet. Here's another thing that's really important. There is no magic bullet whatsoever. What you are doing, just like you make any other decision, you need to collect data from different perspectives, to de-risk that hiring decision, because there's no system that's perfect either.
And that's the root, I think, of the whole top grading and foolproof hiring is highlighting piece. That's the root of it. Instead of just using your gut instincts, you get notably more data. Then you have instincts you can use on top of it. Instead of 70% instinct and 30% data, which would be 30% data would be high for a lot of processes we've seen companies use. So ideally you get to 70 or 80% data and a bit of instinct. That's great. Yep. And that's the root of my take on it is it's getting more data and perspective, and then you're more likely to know if there's a good fit. So why don't we drop into number one, Chris? Because if you can solve lack of candidates, you're my absolute hero. And I just came off a call, we're talking about it. Yeah.
And Yeah, I get like this is just like with hiring, recruiting is so often just haphazard. Yeah, we toss a free ad up in it on Indeed and think the A players are gonna come flocking in, and they're not. Especially,
I just had a call, and they're like trying to hire like a VP of finance, and we're like 3 months in, and they've got their HR person. We can't find anyone. We can't find any. We're trying our networks, can't find anyone. So then they want to put ads on Indeed. I'm like, A player heads of finance aren't on Indeed. The ones that have been let go or the non-A's might be floating around, but you generally, and you've taught me this, Chris, you generally got to go hunt them because they're already in a job being very well taken care of because they're awesome.
yes, and that everyone like those are for your leadership positions. Like you need to be proactive, and you're right. You need to hunt them, because a green flag in terms of making a hiring decision is that someone is successfully, maybe even happily employed right now.
Yeah.
They're doing well. A players don't tend to be on the street for very long. And so you need to hunt them up. Now, when you get down to your individual contributor roles, that's not all you can't do that, especially if you're a little larger organization, there's higher volume of those hires. And so here, I'll share this screen, a couple of really important points on this. And here, playing it from the current slide. As Kevin just mentioned,
Yep.
number one least risky way to recruit is to get a referral from an A player you respect. And so it could be, you could have worked with the person in the past. You saw them in action. And so put them through the process. Like don't skirt any of the process steps. But when you're getting someone referred from someone you really respect, really de-risk the situation to the tune of like 70. You have a 75% chance of getting it right when you recruit from your networks, if that referral is coming from another A player.
And that's a key piece, right? Only from the A, yeah.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
So what do you see people do that help? Like everyone knows you should recruit from your network, and it's not HR's job to do the recruiting. People know that, but what do you see people do that actually works? Like from an executive or a director level, what are people actually doing to do that recruitment?
Making phone calls.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like making phone calls, sending emails, and not just saying, "Hey, we need electrical engineer. Who do you know?" It's here. The second to last bullet point, a really important piece in this, is thinking about marketing to your candidates or marketing to potential candidates. Yeah, thinking about working as hard as you do to get A players into the top of the funnel as you do to get prospects, like paying customers and paying clients into the top of the funnel. One of those things is you need some decent marketing material. And the main thing is your job ad. And so think job advertisement, not slapping a crappy job description that's 3 pages long and utterly boring with way too many bullet points and way too many words, and thinking that's going to stand out. That's what everyone does.
So it's like closer to like a sales brochure. It's like a sales brochure or a product brochure rather than an HR job description.
Everyone, if you are copying and pasting your long, boring job descriptions, and I'm not being critical because all job descriptions are long and boring for that I've run across. If you're using those for to put on job boards, stop doing that and just Google. Actually, Indeed has a really good article with 4 or 5 different parameters on how to write a really good job ad. So a few things, like a few simple things. Your paragraph should not be more than 2 sentences. The job ad, the entire job ad should be less than 600 words. There should be something about how awesome your company is. Just like a job ad. You're marketing yourself.
You're selling it.
You're selling it. And so when people who work their networks well, have a good job ad. They say, here's who we're looking for. Not just, do you know any electrical engineers? Because then your referrer can't help you screen, and they'll help you screen. They're also less apt to refer someone from their network if they don't know exactly who you're looking for, because they're also thinking about that. They're like, I'm not going to refer someone who may not be a good match.
Yeah.
I'm going to
So the more
refer someone
specific you are, you're saying the more specific, the better.
Yes. And, you just ask for a referral. Like, if that person doesn't know people, who would that person know? So they work that network.
Yeah.
It's often quicker and less risky when you do that. So I'm going to talk like marketing candidates. Look at your careers page. If on your website, if it is not the best page on your website, make it the best page on your website. It is often the worst page. Like,
yep, for sure.
By a long margin, the worst page.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
It should be as attractive as your homepage, because that is your homepage for candidates. So video, and there too, just search best careers pages 2020, 2021, 2022. There are all kinds of lists. Check them out and see what
Great
others
idea.
are doing. And for goodness sake, just copy them. Just copy them. So, and I'm not a social media expert. I will admit I don't use social media really at all, other than LinkedIn. But your candidates do, or potential candidates do.
Yep.
And so, use social media to your advantage. And
awesome.
I'm not an expert on it, but those are good. Those are 3 things that you can do. Like, there's a question: do you have to pay A players more? Not necessarily, but reality is, yeah, you have to pay them competitively. So,
right.
Like, if your pay is below market, raise it. Because if you don't, you are not going to get the A player you need in that job. You're not even going to attract them. They're not even going to.
Can you clarify that though? Because one of the things about the methodology and stuff that I've again learned from you and the material over the years is, an A player is at any given salary range, the top candidates, the top 10% is the way my understanding of it. And if we look at pay ranges, we have different companies that if you look at the different quadrants, lots of companies we work with that are very culture oriented, growth oriented, things like that. They'll be at like the 50th percentile, kind of in the middle ish.
Yep.
And but you're not saying they need to be in the 90th percentile. Now, if you're in the 25th, that's a problem.
Yes.
That's a whole different
That's
thing.
what I'm referring to. If you are a meaningful percentage below the midline, you need to at least be somewhere in the middle. Yeah. Somewhere.
And we got companies that are great. They're very culture oriented, lots of opportunities. They're about 50th percentile, many of them. They're all different, but about 50th. But yeah, and if you're hiring a director for 120 grand a year, I'm making up numbers. And we're looking for who in that range is good. But if you're trying to hire a director at 25 grand or 50 grand, when the typical is, or the average is, we're on the same page. Great. That's really important. It's not like double what you pay and you'll get better people. It's just make sure your pay is good or fair, and then find the best people in that range.
Yeah. And Kevin, what I see so often is thinking about that director, whatever kind of director it is the client is thinking about needs a $200,000 director.
Sure.
But they're trying to pay $120,000 and get $200,000 of productivity and leadership.
They're out to lunch. Yeah.
Right. And so that's also what I'm thinking, like the discrepancy. Yeah. Be realistic. There are lots of tools out there. I mean, salary.com and all of it, you can see they have descriptions for you, like, and they're pretty good. They're directionally correct. Use that. Like, get your pay where it needs to be to attract the kind of person and ultimate for your business.
So if you were to tell people to focus on one thing to get a better flow of candidates, and that's normally where people are, they don't get enough great candidates. And even when they hire external recruitment agencies, the pipeline of quality people to talk to is generally the hardest part. So if you were to pick one strategy that you would say that would make the biggest difference, what would that be?
Recruit when you don't need to recruit. Believe it or not, like that, be thinking about the role. I mean, you should have your one-page strategic plan. So you should know where you're going to be in a year, in 3 years, and so you know the roles you're going to need to hire. And so begin working your networks long before. Build a virtual bench. For those of you who
Awesome.
read, build a virtual bench so you can recruit off your
Proactively
front
recruit.
foot. Yes.
Awesome.
You know, then you don't have to be in a rush, because otherwise, if you recruit only when you are in dire need of that position, like
You're already
you're
behind.
going to have to pay recruiters. You're going to have to rely on job. It's a scramble. So that's the biggest piece of advice.
So on that, and then we'll move on. There's a question from Catherine about, what do you think about LinkedIn as a platform for posting jobs?
Yeah. LinkedIn, sure, of course. I'm not being facetious about it. LinkedIn is good, and Indeed is good, and ZipRecruiter is good. Like, they're good, but you probably need more than LinkedIn. If you're going to post on LinkedIn, post on Indeed, maybe pick another one that's a little more like targeted to your industry. Don't put all of your eggs in one basket, because that basket may be the wrong one. And I'm going to go back to that bullet point about job ads. It doesn't matter how many or which job boards you post on. If your job ad is the job description, like everyone else's is,
it's
almost
not compelling.
everyone else's, it's not going to really matter all that much. You're playing on luck. Like it's a lot of luck involved. So,
and I've seen other organizations use LinkedIn to actively recruit, but it's outreach.
Yes.
And outreaching to people. I remember a stat you shared with me once, Chris, and you said that a majority of candidates will have a conversation with a recruiter. A majority.
Yes.
But you got to do the proactive outreach, which lots of people get, and that generally is where people have done it. One thing I'll share, one of my clients did. We were in a meeting. They had seen some of the stuff you're talking about recruitment. We stopped a 3-day strat planning meeting. Everyone jumped on LinkedIn and spent 30 minutes recruiting through their networks. Because we had 3 roles we needed to fill that were leadership roles, and everyone went all through their networks, their college friends, and all kinds of stuff. We got an amazing flow of candidates. And it's not because the candidates weren't there. It's because people didn't make it a priority to spend the time literally just messaging people they knew.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to the next one, Chris. I mean, that's a big one. Which one do you want to dig into next? We probably got like
I've got
20 minutes. Okay.
I've got two, and these are two things that you all should start doing tomorrow. Like tomorrow. And we're gonna solve two of the solutions to 2 of the problems. One is resumes, and the very positive and highlight, and we've got a quote from some author who was also a bit of a comedian. He said, the people look their best on their resume, or people never look better than they do than what they put on their resume. And so how do we get past it? We call it the Truth Motivator. Like the Truth Motivator. We used to call it the torque technique, threat of reference check, which is way too aggressive. This is not that. So the Truth Motivator, as early in the process as possible. And for those who are applying to a job ad, maybe before you even talk with people, let them know that the step right before a job offer is for them to arrange reference calls with managers they've reported to in the past 10 years.
Yes.
And
can you repeat that last part of that sentence, please? Because that might be the most important part.
Yes.
Who managers? So Aunt Sally, John, their brother, those people, we know those don't count,
so they don't count. The 3 people they provide as references
don't count.
Probably don't count, because one of them is going to be Aunt Sally, who is a character reference. And we're, of course, being facetious about Aunt Sally, but it's going to be an Aunt Sally kind of character. So the people they provide you for references are going to be all positive. What we want to do, we want to talk to people who saw them in action from our perspective, from your perspective, which is from the manager's seat. And so let them know, like, they're going to do that. We're not going to contact them out of the blue. You are going to contact them, give them permission to speak with us, get their availability, and send us their availability and their cell number.
They coordinate it.
They coordinate. Yeah, they don't have to literally schedule, but get the window availability, give them permission, and send their cell number. We'll call them during that window. And when you have an A-player candidate and all of those things happen, the reference picks up on the first time you try to call 75% of the time. And, so if you want to talk with 4 people, you will get 3 of them on the phone the first time you try. The fourth one, you will usually speak to within 24 hours.
What happens with non-A players? It is an interesting indicator. It's fascinating. What happens with non-A players?
There are reasons that, well, one, it starts right from the call. When you call them and say, hey, let's talk about references. I'd like to speak with these 4 people. And 2 of them like, yeah, I don't know where that person is. And, they start hemming and hawing, they're in Fiji on vacation for a month. And, I heard one, the manager was the store manager of a Target store in the same city for 10 years. And the person left that store 2 years before that. And it's, I don't know where he is. I know where he is. I don't know what the website, but it was like, go find me or something, whatever it is, and put his name. Like, I had his phone number within 30 seconds and called him, and it was an accurate phone. So you hear excuses. That's the thing.
Lots of stories.
Another thing is once they arrange for those calls, you make the calls and the reference never calls back. Managers of people who were A players in that job call back.
What about all these rules about giving references and you're not supposed to, et cetera, et cetera?
Most HR departments have created a rule that says you may not be a reference as an agent or a representative of the company. And they dissuade managers from taking reference calls. We essentially get around that by the candidate giving the person permission to speak with us. And we also refer to it as a personal reference. Like, this is a personal reference. This is, Chris talking about Kevin. This is not Topgrading giving, our official opinion on Kevin. And guy, even though a couple of things. One, at least in the US, most states have a law that gives former managers amnesty when they do reference calls. So the fear of litigation, and that's what it's for. The fear of litigation is unfounded. Actually, it's unfounded. Even California lets managers give reference calls. California does it everyone.
So, gentlemen, we don't ever hear issues with A players about getting those people. It's not common. There's another question here is that what if you're hiring someone away from a company and they have their manager isn't necessarily aware yet that they're considering taking a job? How do you handle that? And if they've been there for a decade, what do you do?
Then there's inherently more risk in the hiring decision. I would argue that there is inherently risk in the hiring decision just because they've been at the same place for 10 years and they are coming to your new place, and there's not a lot of evidence that they can make a transition from one company to another. So that's inherently risky. Not being able to talk to the manager they reported to for the past 10 years, risky. So what do you do? If everything looks good and this person looks just wonderful in terms of fit, just talk to whomever you can. Maybe there was a manager they reported to 2 years ago who is no longer there. You could probably talk to that person. Maybe there's a mentor in a different department, maybe at their manager's level, who knows they're looking. Maybe they're reporting to an ogre as a manager, and so other people know and they believe it, and they're like, I'd leave if I were you too. And so you just talk with them, have a conversation. We don't want to screw anything up for someone. If they are not planning on leaving unless they join us, we don't want to screw anything up for them. So use your judgment. Use your judgment in that. But just know, when that is the situation, that hire is inherently riskier than someone who you can talk to all of their managers.
Yep, makes sense. And there's some people are very transparent with their managers when they're moving on, and some people aren't. And some people, I've heard people say, well, we can talk to customers or other people. It's not as good as the direct manager, though.
Yes.
I heard somebody say once about, that you make the final offer contingent on talking to their manager. But I've heard that advice. I just don't know. That seems like a tough move.
It is a tough move, and a move that a lot of people are unwilling to take. But it's and what it is the wording is, it's really important. The wording, the offer is contingent on there being no surprises in the reference call when we talk to your current manager. And so it doesn't have to be a glowing reference. Yeah, it's like, candidate, just tell us how you think that reference call is going to go and what you think they're going to tell you about us with strengths and weaker areas. based on what you know about them. And so, they might say like, you can talk to her, but she's not going to be happy that I'm leaving. And
Yes.
I've heard the way she talks about others who have left, calling them disloyal and whatnot. She's probably going to say some similar things to me. But that's an accurate portrayal if that's what actually happens. And that means there were no surprises when you did the reference. So yeah, again, play that one is do what you are comfortable with.
Yeah.
But just know if you don't talk to the person they've reported to in the past 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's an inherently riskier decision.
Your odds of success are going down. So if you could be in the 70 to 90 range, you might now be in the 50 range because you don't have that last piece. I'm making up numbers, but the last piece of verification. Yep. Absolutely. Totally makes sense. And the thing that you've shared before and Top Grading talks about is that threat of the reference checks also gets people to be very open. Right. Like even when they know you're going to verify later, because they kind of like the truth serum you talked about, it makes people more likely to really lay it out as it is because it puts them in that framework in their mind that this is getting verified. I better be transparent or open about it.
And what happens too with that truth motivator, or the, as we used to call it, the threat of reference check, like those who have essentially have something to hide on their resume, whose resume may be puffed up more and, and might not want you to talk to 2 out of 4 of the bosses they've reported to because they didn't have great relationships and left in terms. They'll just quietly drop out. And that's okay. I mean, that's okay. I had a client, this is the most extreme example I've heard of so far of the truth motivator working. So this client, they were new to implementing top grading, and they hadn't mentioned the candidate arranged reference calls until they brought the person in for the top grading interview, for the chronological interview. And so half hour into the interview, after they got done talking about education and they were talking about the first job, they mentioned the reference calls. And at the break, they took a break about an hour in, the candidate disappeared.
Really?
She left. She got up and left. And Client said, "What should we do?" And I said, like nothing. I mean, okay, it all worked. And they said they think that, they could see her get nervous when started talking to those managers. So it works. And the fourth solution. So we've actually talked about 3 solutions, 3 of the 5 solutions already. More A players in the top of your funnel, use the truth motivator, and then just follow through with it right before a reference call and talk to managers they've reported to in the past 10 years and others if it makes sense to do that. We're not just limiting it to managers they've reported to. And so the fourth solution is do a better interview with finalist candidates.
Imagine that.
I mean, imagine that. Imagine that. Do a better interview. And what does a better interview look like? One, guys, like it's a little bit longer than you're probably accustomed to. It doesn't have to be 4 or 5 hours long, but a good finalist candidate interview is probably longer than an hour. And so, and why is that? It's because the most effective interview format we've found is chronological, in-depth, and structured. What we're essentially doing is getting and facilitating candidates telling us their story. Beginning, for those of us in Canada and the US, in high school, so their education experience from when they were 14 to 18, in high school, and asking them questions about every experience they've had since then, focusing on the most recent 10 years, getting in the most detail, most recent 10 years, high points, low points, people, and why they made work transitions. Those are essentially the 4 things. What were accomplishments? What were mistakes? What would your manager tell us about? What would you, and why would you move? Those are questions. We get their story. As humans, we learn really effectively from stories.
We do.
And so we get to know people better. We get to see their patterns of behavior, and hence we make better hiring decisions when we get that full story. And that's it. The thing is, if you do the other 3 things we've talked about, get more A players in the top of the funnel, use the truth motivator, and then eventually follow through with the reference calls. But using the truth motivator, the non-A players will quietly drop away. And you will be interacting with a higher percentage of A player candidates. And
naturally, so without
naturally.
That's what we explained and said with this book. I said, why don't you have the scorecard in here, Chris? Because the scorecard is a beautiful tool and I love it. Kevin, it's an amazing tool, but most people won't do it. It requires a lot more work and discipline. These things you're talking about are basic, and those interviews blow my mind. Yep. And I don't do near as many as you would or Kristen would or anyone else. I don't do them all the time, but when I have, they're shocking. Because everyone's good for 60 minutes. Everyone can have a great story for 60 minutes. And I remember one in particular, and we got to about 75 to 90 minutes, in that range roughly. I felt like we were two guys sitting around a campfire having some cocktails, and the stories, and I remember with this, he revealed to me, and he revealed about extreme burnout, getting fired, his boss like destroying a relationship and blah, blah, blah. And then when I went on through it all, I'm like, this guy's amazing, because I could see his character and then how he rebuilt it and how he chose to leave because he couldn't continue in that role. Like you get to see the character and what they're made of. And obviously you see the opposite. And people, what people will tell you is shocking. Like it's almost like, because their guard and the filters drop for most of them. And if it doesn't, you can, without being a rocket scientist, you can start to see incredibly obvious patterns. It's incredible. And that's what I so respect this methodology for that. It really helps. And you don't have to be perfect at it. Just people talking for that long. And if they're talking 90% of the time, you get really good stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And thing is, when you're probably interacting with someone who has been an A player pretty consistently over their career, by using the other couple techniques, you don't have to be a perfect interviewer. That's the thing. When you're interviewing an A player, you don't have to be a great, because
they give you details and they stick to it, and they're not trying to redirect you and skim off your question. And it's amazing.
And the other thing is, A players also, they usually have some less interview experience than your C players do.
Right, because they don't bounce around a lot.
Right. That's right. Right.
They
tend to be pulled from one place to another.
One of the CEOs I work with is looking for a CFO, and he just sent me the resume the other day, and I looked at it. I think the longest in a 25-year career this person's had a job is 21 months. Mm-hmm. Right. And I just said to him, I said, this is a horrible pattern. And the jobs didn't keep rising up. Horrible pattern. And he's like, no, but he's got a great explanation for all of them. I'm sure he does.
I bet.
And maybe, and that's a point of data. And maybe there's really good stories and reality behind it. Maybe the guy is amazing, but that first point of data says he's not. But again, that doesn't mean it's a decision. It's a point to look at and to be aware of.
Yeah. And that's right. And that's this top grading interview, the chronological, in-depth and structured interview, gives you the opportunity to get to the real story, on the resume or the CV, and see if that, what we would call job hopping, is in fact job hopping, or if there's some other more positive
or something else. Yeah, exactly. And when it happens 14 times, I'm skeptical. Yep. But we don't know, and we wouldn't make a decision based on it. We would find out. Yeah, it is fascinating. The other thing I will say on this about that interview I love, and that's why I really push hard with our clients to use it. And for this, you do some of them, and Kristen does a lot of them too, and is figuring out if they're going to fit the culture. Because for example, with CFOs in particular, many of them are brilliant minds, but not brilliant leaders. And in many of our clients, they need that CFO for both. Mm-hmm. They need to be the brilliant thought partner for the CEO, and in some cases for the board or the private equity firm. But then they also need to lead an amazing team and help to, and we've had so many of them that their skill set is off the charts. They meet all of that. But in terms of leading and building a team, they have, they would be a 3 out of 10. And that's, that kind of stuff you get to see. So it's eyes wide open. Yeah. I got just two quick questions, and then we'll kind of wrap up here, Chris, if there's one more thing you want to share. But one was, sometimes executives leave companies in messy ways. There might be a lawsuit or a battle over, when with their former employer. How do you factor that in reference checks, and how do you account for that if they've had basically a battle on the way out?
It's a good question. It's an excellent question, because it could be because of the candidate, and it could be because of, those who are in control, or the board, or the owner, whomever it may be. And you need to be very comfortable that you know the correct story.
Yeah.
And so,
And it's not their pattern in their career.
and that is also important. Yes, if they leave in a messy way, more often than not, like, that's probably enough to say, just stay away. The reference calls don't matter. Like, stay away from that person, or stay away from that person as a candidate. And
it would be similar to the constant job hopping. If someone's leaving with a mess, generally A players don't leave with a mess, from what I have seen in our organizations. But it's not. So it's a point of data to be aware of, and then you got to go verify and find the truth.
And I would suggest, if that is just one time, in the person's career that you can that you uncover, probably talk to more than one person they worked with there. And so I think that I'm
go a little bit deeper under reference checks. Yep.
Yeah, and deeper, and kind of in a couple of different areas, maybe a couple of different functions. And I'm guessing the question also had to do with, should we talk to that manager? Let's say it was the owner, it was a CFO who left, and it was the owner that the person reported to. Should we talk to the owner? That one you have to use your judgment on. I mean, you're going to have to use a judgment. I would lean
towards yes.
Ask.
Yeah, I would ask. Yeah, and I would lean towards yes, because you're going to learn the other side of the story.
Yes,
you might have to triangulate, but that's use your judgment. Awesome. Yeah. So, Chris, if you're
guys, I would say, just with the reference calls, we are not looking for glowing reference calls every single time. We're looking for accurate reference calls. Accurate reference calls that verify what
to match what you heard. Right. You're looking for truth. It's a truth reconciliation. Here's what they told you, and you're hearing similar things.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chris. Because we're not looking for perfect candidates. We're looking for people who will fit the role and thrive in the role, and everyone's going to be a little off.
Yep.
You're looking to validate the story in your head, and often when we do them, it's like, here's a couple concerns we have, and we're looking to validate and make sure it all matches, and making sure that we haven't had a very persuasive person slip through and fool us.
Yes.
Awesome
Good stuff.
Chris, I just love talking about this, and I'm glad that we could share this with a bunch of others today as well, because I think this is the hardest part of building a great company. Getting those right people in the key seats, it's the hardest. And our clients, when we get amazing people in those leadership roles, it's easier. And when you have people who aren't thriving in their roles, the CEOs and the executives get dragged down and end up with part-time jobs trying to oversee people that aren't thriving. And obviously, the people that aren't thriving, it's not good for them either.
Yeah, and we'll just kind of as a closing, one other thing to think about is, kind of just connecting with what you just said. This is hard. I would argue this is the hardest part of any leader's job. Getting the people piece right. It's hard. It's hard to get it right. You're not going to get it right every time. Even if you engage us as deeply as you could engage with it, we don't get it right every time. And so when you don't get it right, though, here's what's really, really important. When you don't get it right, act quickly. Be fair, but act quickly, and don't let that be, and especially C player, and especially if they're a toxic C, don't let them linger for a long time. Make the decision, move on as quickly as you can, fairly, and try it again.
Yeah, fairly and with dignity. Like, allow them. We made a mistake by hiring them. They're not a bad human. They just don't fit with us. Yep. So find the most graceful, dignified way for them to move on. If they're stealing from you, that's maybe a little bit different. But if it's the most dignified, respectful way, because you don't need to hurt someone on the way out because you made a bad choice, whether it's a new hire or a promotion. I think that's super important. The best day to have them move on is tomorrow, as long as they've been given the right feedback and everything else.
Yep.
Awesome. Chris, thank you so very much. This is awesome as always. And hopefully this has given everyone else some ideas on what they can do to improve their hiring and the simple, basic things. You can do the advanced things. You can do scorecards and getting more thorough and doing the talent reviews and all that other good stuff. But these basic things make a difference. So thanks for writing a book that made it way simpler, Chris.
My pleasure, and great. I really appreciate your having me.
Yep. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.